what these are just little snippets of a proof. Okay, just like the first line, what you would say next. We're not doing an entire proof, because I know you guys probably have the algebra part down, right? Simple. The only thing some students mess up is the simplified statement. Okay, but it's when I give you something, what would you tell me next? All right? Now, some of them have pictures, some of them don't, and that's okay. We don't need a picture. We just need to ask ourselves what it's telling us. So the first one says, angle A is a right angle, given. What could we conclude if we know it is a right angle? Think about it. What is the definition of a right angle? Brett?
The measure of angle A equals 90 degrees.
Yes. You even said measure. Again, word. What's the definition of the word? A right angle has a measure of 90 degrees. So this would be the definition of a right angle. Okay, and again, you are more than welcome to abbreviate definition, DEF. Angle, angle symbol, shortcut. All right, next one, if I give you angle A and angle B are supplementary, given. What could you tell me if this was a given statement in my proof? What can we conclude? What do we know about supplementary angles? Katie? Perfect. The measure of angle A plus the measure of angle B equals 180 degrees. If you look back in your notes, when we defined what supplementary angles are, they were two angles that sum to 180 degrees. So you actually just take and add in the specific pieces and you say the sum of these two angles is 180 degrees. What is this? The definition of supplementary angles. And I'm abbreviating supplementary because I don't have space. Now the next one talks about a segment, and I don't see a picture. I like to draw one. Some of you don't have to or won't want to. That's fine.
Please excuse interruption. VOTEC buses have arrived. All VOTEC students should be coming to the bus now. Thank you.
So M is the midpoint of AE. And we just looked at one of these in last night's homework. It was filled in for us. We just had to justify why. What would be the first thing I say after they tell me M is the midpoint? Maddie? Yes, congruent. AM is congruent to ME. So we will put segment AM is congruent to segment ME. The definition of a midpoint is that it divides a segment into two congruent segments. Definition of a midpoint. See why we did vocab so much? Okay, and then we know, eventually when we do these problems, we always plug in x's later. So you have to go from congruent to an equal sign. So we'll change this to be AM equals ME. What allows me to do that? What allows me to do that, Jeremiah? Good. Definition of congruent, I'm going to say segments. Make sure you don't just write definition of congruent, because you just have to add in that specific piece, whether it's a segment or an angle. And I use the congruent symbol as much as I can, so I don't have to write the word. So in your homework, you'll see one like this. So use this sheet to help you start with the geometry if you need to. Then from there, we know we'd plug in like 2x plus 10 equals 5x minus 2, and then you'd solve your algebra. All right, the next one says that ray BD bisects angle ABC. I'm going to draw a little picture. You don't have to, but it might help. So angle ABC, ray BD bisects. Remember my little analogy of dissecting a frog, cutting in half. So the bisector will cut it into two congruent angles. So I'll add little markings. Who can tell me what I would write on line 2? Marquise.
The measure of angle ABD is congruent to the measure of
Okay, really close. When we use congruence, we don't talk about the measure. We're just talking about the hypothetical angle. But then when we use the equal sign, we'll use the measure. Okay? So we actually will say angle ABD, everything else was right though, is congruent to angle DBC. Because congruent is just saying they have the same measure. You don't have to use the measure. When we use the equal, we're saying that the measures are equal. I know it sounds silly, but that was in our notes a while ago. It just, when we did it, we never really needed it at that point, so we didn't practice it. That would be the definition of what? Definition of
Angle bisector.
Perfect. An angle bisector. A lot of people on their test will put definition of a bisector, and you will lose points. You need to tell me what type. Just look at the statements. It's an angle bisector. It's cutting the angle. And then, of course, to plug in x values or angles, we need to go from congruence to equal. So when we do that, we do add in the measure, like Marquis said. So we'll say the measure of angle ABD is equal to the measure of angle DBC. We know if two angles are congruent, then their measures are equal. So that's the definition of congruent angles. Okay, now the next few, we're not given any words. We're just given pictures here. So who thinks they could conclude something just based on the picture? Just based on the picture. Brett?
Ray ED bisects angle GEF.
Okay, we would only be able to do that if they added markings in already, which they didn't. It does look like it's in the middle, but we would need to see the markings to do that. Katie? Good. So we have small angle plus small angle equals the total angle. Okay, so the only thing, Katie, we'll put an angle symbol in front of that and a measure. So we'll say the measure of angle GED. Again, when you do name an angle, you're tracing it. So either GED or DEG, one of the two. Plus the measure of angle DEF equals the measure of angle GEF. And again, you have to think through proofs. You can't just like memorize them and do the same thing every time. They're all going to be different. So you have to look at it and say, what allows me to do this? I added two angles together. Adding angles, angle addition postulate. This sounds silly, but somebody on their test next week will write this and they'll put segment addition postulate. There's not segments that you're adding together. So just be careful and actually think through the problem. What am I doing over here? I'm adding angles. What allows me to add angles? The angle addition postulate. Okay, the next one just gives me a picture. I see some segments. What could I conclude just by looking at the picture? Maddie? Good. You don't need segment bars because we're adding and we have an equal sign. We usually only use segment bars with the congruence. If you put them, I'm not going to take off because you got the idea correct, but it's really not proper to put them there. But we are talking about the segments. We just, when we add them, we're using an equal sign. We don't put the bar. We only put the bar when there's a congruence. And that's adding segments, so that's our segment addition postulate. Very nice. Now the next one's going to be the hardest one. This is something that will show up in proofs all year, and all year some of you will forget one of the steps. So we have a given statement First of all, what does this symbol mean again? Joey? Good, this means perpendicular. Which if there's one word you're going to misspell, it's probably perpendicular. Now, before we, actually no. Whenever we did these before, what did you immediately add markings-wise into the picture? What did you add markings-wise? If you knew that. Marquise? No. Maddie? Yes. Perpendicular, the definition of perpendicular means that these intersect to form right angles. Okay, technically 4 right angles, right? So that's what you have to write down. You can't say that it's 90. You actually have to say that it's a right angle first. Okay? Because the definition of perpendicular is that these intersect to form right angles. Now, it doesn't matter which angle you choose to say is a right angle. I'm just going to do this one. So let's just all unmark these. So I'm going to say angle SVR is a right angle. Again, you could also say angle SVQ or RVT, any of them. I'm just thinking one of the 4. That is the definition of this symbol and this word. Okay, I'm not going to say perpendicular segment or lines because one of them is a line and one of them is a segment. So I'm just going to say definition of perpendicular. If you look back in your notes, that's what the definition was. Then, if we know it is a right angle, what else do we know about angle SVR? Right? It's 90 degrees. So whenever we say 90, we are going to add in the measure of angle SVR, and we'll say it equals 90 degrees. Again, I went from the word right angle to the number 90, so that's the definition of a right angle. See if you guys can try the last 2, and then we'll go over them while I pass out your homework. Anyone think they got the next one? The measure of angle A plus the measure of angle B equals 180. What could we conclude if we are told that? Joseph? Very good. So looking back up at the top, when they gave us the word supplementary, we were able to go to the sum of them as 180. You can go in reverse. If you know something adds to 2 angles add to be 180, then you can go backwards and say they are supplementary. The reason is the same. So we'll say angle A and angle B are supplementary. Again, number to word or word to number is the definition of that word. And our last one. Angle A and angle B are complementary angles. Noah?
Measurement angle A plus measurement angle B equals 90 degrees. This is the definition of complementary angle.
Perfect. The measure of angle A plus the measure of angle B equals 90 degrees. And that's the definition of complementary angles. Perfect. Perfect, perfect. All right, I'm going to let you guys work for the rest of the time on the homework. I'm going to suggest that you, remember you can use the back of the sheet as kind of like a little word bank for now. I would suggest that you skip 1 and 2 and save them for later because I think you guys are actually pretty strong with your algebra. So maybe don't do these while you're here in class, but rather try some of the geometry ones while you're here in class. That way if you have a question you can ask me. Okay, you still have to do numbers 1 and 2. You might want to start with, some of the ones that have geometry stuff in it. Okay, you want to also make sure that you take any of the given and you put it on the picture whenever you're doing these problems. If you guys want to move around and work with a friend, you may. And if you have questions, just raise your hand and I can come help you.